Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SavvyCast. This is Jamie, and I'm so grateful to all of you who are joining today, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast platform. Today's guest is one that I have never met personally. I'm so eager to get to know her on today's episode. I stumbled across her Instagram account, Seeds and Leaven, and I immediately reached out to my podcast coordinator and said, would you please invite Morgan Cheek to be on the SavvyCast. So I'm about to introduce her, but first I just want to read a little of her bio. Morgan is an endurance athlete. She is the author of 3 books, On Milk and Honey, Are We There Yet, and Even in Darkness. Morgan and her husband Hugh have 3 children, 2 in heaven, Bailey Grace 6 and Allie 7. And one on earth, James, who was adopted from China at age 7 and is now 11. Morgan is passionate about helping people believe they are loved and accepted by God, and she longs to help others understand how to live their best, authentic lives in the midst of all seasons. She is an endurance athlete who loves any kind of physical challenge, and I am so excited to have as my guest today, Morgan Cheek. Morgan, welcome to the SavvyCast.
I'm happy to be here. I'm super pumped to be able to speak with you today.
Well, I just want to start because I have so many things I want to ask you, but I want to start with the icebreaker question that everyone answers on the SavvyCast, and that is, what would you choose as your last meal?
I am so glad that is the question, because I thought I was going to have to answer, what did I eat as my last meal? And it's a lot less glamorous
Same here.
than what my answer will be. And I knew I had to answer honestly. Okay, so I think that if it was my last meal, first of all, I would have dessert last, but I would need to have a very good dessert. It would have to be a la mode, probably either a bread pudding or something with a rich chocolate sort of syrup situation. Would be, so dessert would be last, but it's probably top in my priority. And then I think a really well seasoned steak with some really good rosemary potatoes and some kind of vegetable, maybe a Brussels sprout, maybe a broccoli. But I do enjoy healthier eating. It's not just my profession. I actually like healthier foods. And so I do that. And then some good red wine, just some really good red wine. And that'd be it, you know?
That sounds like my kind of last meal as well. That sounds wonderful. Well, Morgan, I just want everyone to know who's watching or listening, this is the first time I've met you, but I was on Instagram. I don't know what I was doing, but I came across your Instagram account, Seeds and Leaven, and I started reading, and I immediately texted my podcast coordinator. I said, look at this profile. Please invite Morgan to be on the SavvyCast, because I know she's got a lot to share. And you probably, well, at least I know you've been through a whole lot more in life so far than I have. We don't know what awaits us every day, but wow. So anyway, and then I was telling you, I asked my family on family text, do you have anything you want to ask Morgan? And one of my daughters who's about to get married said, just ask her how you ever get through something like she's gotten through. So let's just start with your story, Morgan. Just share what you would like of your story.
Yeah, I am one of probably the least concise people I know. I'm actually my editor's worst nightmare. So I'll try to do a really good job of summarizing years and years of life. But I mean,
Morgan, may I stop you? My bad. Can you tell us first a little bit about where you and Hugh live, and just where we'll have a picture of where you are before you dive into it?
Yes. So we're in Homewood, Alabama, and actually just moved. We were in Liberty Park for years when my daughters were alive, which I'll get into that, here in a minute. We were in Liberty Park and adopted our son, who is now 11, from China when he was 7. And he also was with us in Liberty Park. And then since then, in September, moved to Homewood. Guess you don't tell people your address. We're in a little house in Homewood, right in the thick of things. And so it's very different than if you know Birmingham, Liberty Park is sort of set off to itself. It's
Yeah.
a little off the beaten path, and where we are in Homewood is right smack in the middle of everything. So we have loved the change. We've needed a change. It's been
Right.
really good.
This is mind blowing. I didn't know you were in Birmingham. That this is
Are you
crazy.
are you in Birmingham?
I'm in Birmingham. This is crazy. I
I didn't know
thought
you were in Birmingham.
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, I go to Homewood, like I was there yesterday. I go all the time. I'm further down near Greystone, but oh my goodness,
We've probably seen each other a million times.
we probably have, and we'll have to have lunch, and you'll have to meet my daughters. Morgan, I'm sorry I interrupted. Just wanted to get that framework. So just dive into your story.
You're great. To summarize, I will say I grew up, and I won't go too far back, but I did grow up in what I would consider, no family is perfect, but a pretty Pleasantville type family, very Southern, just typical small town Southern upbringing. Did cotillion, did sorority, did all of those things. And honestly, and a part of where I'm at in my journey right now is learning to sort of relearn that really never fit me. That was always really not necessarily who I am, but a mold that I felt like I needed to fit. And I put that on me. I mean, I think that I just was afraid to be myself, which is a lot of the message in this new season that I encourage other people in, because it's something that I've really done a lot of personal work in. So I say that to say, not that my upbringing was perfect, but I don't have this childhood story of a lot of trauma. There were things, but really grew up just thinking that I was a part of the fortunate ones, whatever that meant to me at the time. My faith was always a part of my life. And always I felt what I felt like was a unique closeness to God from an early age. I mean, really just felt a spiritual connection to life in general from an early age, and kind of, as we all do, have still been learning to navigate that and navigate what faith looks like to me. But my knowledge of faith and God was limited to God being someone that we prayed to, who blessed us and protected us from the bad things of the world, and who kind of kept us in line, kept us from doing bad things. And I always felt like there was more to him than that, and had prayed a lot in my life to experience that. I had prayer journal after prayer journal in high school and college, just saying, God, use me for something bigger than myself. And I always joke with people, that's a scary prayer. If you pray that sincerely, you better put your big girl panties on, because there's going to be some things around the corner that you may not have thought you were asking for. And so I met my husband in college. And
where did y'all go to college?
University of Georgia. So went to UGA and met my husband there. And he at the time was very much just your typical Southern frat boy. He was going to med school. On paper, he was exactly what I thought my parents would have wanted me to end up with. And so it just seemed like life was sort of unfolding in that blessed mentality, if that makes sense. It was all kind of working out according to the way it should work out for people that were the fortunate ones.
Can I ask you what where did you grow up, and what faith or denomination were you part of?
Yeah, I grew up in a Methodist church and actually explored on my own. I attended youth group with my friends who were Southern Baptist a good bit. Again, I feel like this is such a digression to all the meat that we want to unpack in this conversation. So I'll try to not spend too much time here. But I think that for me, I really, really wrestled with wanting to have a deep spiritual relationship with God, but feeling like I didn't fit the mold of the typical person that did, if that makes sense. Like not wanting, I mean, I always joke with people, I never wanted to wear a turtleneck and play board games and drink Sprite on a Friday night. That never felt like it fit my mold. But I also wanted to talk about the things that mattered in life and to recognize my creator in the midst of that. And I wouldn't even say it's all unfolded. I mean, we're all always evolving, no matter,
Mhm.
where we're at in the journey. And so it's a still unfolding process for me. But at the time, I was involved in, very traditional Southern conservative churches,
Mhm.
and really wrestled with my place there in the midst of all that. And so
Mhm.
anyways, meet Hugh, and we date all through college. And then we got married his second year of medical school. And
Mhm.
so he was in Augusta, Georgia. I moved there, and we were invested in mission trips overseas. And I really sort of had thought maybe that we would end up doing overseas missions. I mean, had really seen, I don't know if you've been overseas, but if you step outside of a first world country in any
Mhm.
capacity, it changes you.
Yeah.
And for me, for some people, I think it changes them in the sense that they start to feel more fortunate. For me, I started to see the futility in material things and money and things that slip through our hands that we don't get to take with us when we go, and started to really crave the richer things in life. And so
Mm.
I wouldn't have been able to articulate it that way at the time, but
Mhm.
now looking back, I think that that's kind of the place that God had me there. So anyways, we get married. Again, we are kind of in this mindset of he was about to start residency. We move here to Birmingham. He is going into pediatrics, and we find out that we are pregnant literally right after he starts residency. We've just moved to Birmingham, and this is such a sensitive topic because I have so many friends who would literally
Mhm.
kill to have a pregnancy that was like and the next thing we knew we were pregnant. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I sort of hate that part of the story, but it's important, I think, to
Mhm.
say that like that was not our game plan. I mean,
Yeah.
we were not in a place where we were wanting to build our family at that point. We were just starting in a new city. So I find out I'm pregnant, and we go to the doctor. I had to find a doc. I didn't have an OBGYN
Mm.
in Birmingham yet, and go to the doctor and find out that it is twins. I love this. I talk about this story in my first book, but I literally, when we're looking at the ultrasound, this is how just ignorant I was to the whole thing. We're looking at the ultrasound, and the little sweet tech, she has this sweet voice, and she says, "Yeah," she said, "there they are." She said, "There's two sacks." So I look at Hugh, because he's a resident, he must know everything, about medical things. And I look at him, and I'm thinking, oh, she can already tell it's a boy. How pregnant I am, two
Oh,
sacks. And he
oh
looks
my
at me,
goodness.
and he said, she's saying twins. Well,
Oh,
that
wow. Yeah.
was the furthest thing from my mind. I mean, the
Mhm.
furthest thing. And so just to compartmentalize, like, okay, you're pregnant, and also it's two babies. So I burst into tears. The text says, "I'm going to give you guys a minute," and he was like, "What do you, where are these emotions coming from?" And I said, "I'm terrified." And he said, "Of what?" And I said, "Of my whole life." It's like,
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it's funny now because looking back on, all that we've been through now, that was nothing.
Yeah.
Finding out
Yeah.
we had twins, like, was nothing. So anyways, we obviously get used to the fact that we are now going to have two babies, and we find out they're two girls, and all of my appointments, all of the genetic, everything comes back happy and healthy, just like we love to say, happy and healthy. And I try not to judge people for that phrase because I said it too.
Mhm.
We just pray that they're happy and healthy.
Mhm.
And I think when you walk through what we've walked through, you start to begin to realize that it's not that those are bad things to ask for, but those are just not the only things. And that sometimes the plan is a lot bigger than just happy and healthy. And so, anyways, have the girls, and birth goes great. We're getting used to newborn trenches with twins. And then over time, again, long story shorter, we realize that something is atypical about the girls, and they're not developing. Typically, they're not sitting yet when they get to that sort of milestone mark. And so we just decide we'll start early intervention, see where things go. And you never think that you are going to be the one to have the story where things are life changing. I mean, you never really set yourself up for that. And so we just thought it's going to be fine. They were twins. They were 1 day shy of full term. Nothing remarkable went on with them. They were breastfeeding well. That's a whole another barbaric, thing with twins. It's like everything was going normally,
Yeah.
except they just didn't seem like they were developing normally. And about 9 months old, it was very clear we needed to go see neurology. Something was definitely wrong, as we say.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, lots of testing, everything kept coming back normal. But the problem is it wasn't normal. We could tell,
Mm-hmm.
things as kids develop, the older they get and the less milestones they meet, the more clear it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally, when they were about 2.5 years old, we were still undiagnosed, but they were still not meeting any of the milestones. They weren't sitting up. We had actually had to back off on some soft foods, which looking back on it, that was probably the beginning of the progression of their
Mm-hmm.
disease. I was suspecting seizures. No one else was really, medically speaking, picking up on that. But I, just as mom, saw some unique activities. So I think they probably started having seizures at that point. But then finally, about 2.5, we went to the NIH, the National Institute of Health,
Mm-hmm.
and participated in their undiagnosed disease program. They tested us for everything under the sun, and it still came back as undiagnosed. And we kind of had to accept that maybe they weren't going to have a diagnosis, for the rest of their life, which would have driven me absolutely mad. I mean, just crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, and then finally, they give us a call a couple months later and say that they've been studying rats in Sweden and that something came up on our last genetic report that wasn't known as a disease, but that seemed to be a disease. And they had found 5 other children in the world with that same mutation. So within a few months there, we got diagnosed with HECW2, HECW2,
Can you
which is
spell
not
HEC double?
HECW2, which at the time there was, 7 of us. We are still the only set of twins in the world that have it. It's not hereditary. People have a hard time understanding the difference in genetic and hereditary. Genetic is something that happens within our gene pool, whether that's in conception, during development, etc. Hereditary is something that's passed on, like from Hugh or I. Hugh and I don't carry the gene. It
Okay.
is just a de novo. It's just a non-hereditary mutation, and they're the only set of twins in the world, and because they're identical, they both have it. So we at that point didn't know much about the disease, but we knew that it was going to be something that affected them for the rest of their life, and most likely would be something that would, ultimately be life threatening for them. But at the time when they were 3, we really didn't know what that meant.
So there were really no studies prior to this. They were learning as they discovered.
Zero.
Whoa.
Zero.
So
The
you didn't
girls are
have a
the first case study. The first case study.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. So there was no support group. There was no book to read. There was
Nope.
nothing. You were learning as the doctors as they went.
Right. And I think so. So again, over time, they're 2.5, 3 years old. And over time, you start having to have these gripped hands towards everything you thought that your life was going to look like. And again, like I said, I grew up in a decently idyllic childhood too. So everything that I'd been taught about what a good life was going to look like was slowly being pulled from my hands. When they had to get wheelchairs, I was just so convinced that God was going to heal them from this, and that they were going to walk, we were going to see miracles, we were going to get the masses to start praying. I mean, all these things that you hear, I was convinced it was going to happen. Well, I had to let go of that dream, had to push 2 wheelchairs. That was an adventure. I mean, pushing 2 wheelchairs through a store got second nature to me. But in the beginning, it was like, heck am I going to do this? And
At
then as the
this
girls,
age, what age were they, Morgan,
they were 3, they were
when they
3 when
got
they got their
wheelchair?
wheelchairs.
Okay.
Yeah, they were 3 when they got wheelchairs. And so,
Were they verbal? Were
they were not. They were
okay.
nonverbal. They were the very, very unique thing about our girls is that most of their development was about at the level of a 6-month-old level. And at the risk of sounding completely politically incorrect, a lot of children who have that level of development are not very communicative at all. Our
Mhm.
girls were very communicative. They would communicate with their eyes. They would give you hugs. They would wave. They would laugh. They would smile. They would mimic. So we were able, such a gift, we were able to have a relationship with them in spite of, their very infant-like sort of demeanor and behaviors, which was
Wow.
such a gift.
That's
Yeah,
amazing. Okay. So y'all have been married how long? You're in your third year? Y'all
second
got
year of
pregnant.
marriage.
Okay.
Second year of marriage. Yeah,
So they have a disorder so rare. They're the first
right,
ones.
right,
Y'all are just you don't know what to expect. You're just taking one day at a time. How
right.
was this? And I do want you to continue, but where is your marriage as all of this? Are y'all together? Are you handling this differently? I'm sure you were home. He was in
Yeah,
residency, so he couldn't be.
yes, he was in residency working 90 hours a week. At the time, he was pretty emotionally unable to engage based on both his career, and just trying to survive residency, and then also just where he was personally and where, his childhood had him. I mean, just he emotionally at the time, that's not where he is now, was not able to really
Mm,
engage it. And so what I have learned now through a lot of personal work that I'm in process in is that what I did was I began to disassociate from my own body in order to cope with the reality of what was going on because it was too much. I couldn't, my body went into survival mode when they started seizing every day. They seized a lot at night, starting around 3.5. And so their pattern was different. So it would be one of them seized. I would go in there. They usually vomited with seizures. They'd cry. I'd clean them up. I'd clean their bed up. About 30 minutes later, the other would seize, and then that pattern would continue every night, night after night after night. And then the daytime was very similar. And so when Hugh was home, he was very much a very, very incredible dad to our girls and helpful and did all he could, even in the midst of residency, which was amazing.
mm, mm,
When he wasn't home at night, which was a lot of the time,
mhm.
that was me. I just did it. And
Did you ever
um,
have anyone helping you?
my parents are incredible. They don't live here, they live in Tennessee. And so my parents are incredible. They would come in as much as they could and
Mhm,
try to help. But again, there was also this level of, you love your kids so much. And when your kids have special and unique needs, and in your heart that you are the one that knows those needs the most and that
mhm,
they can't articulate those needs,
mhm,
there's a mama bear that came out in me that pretty much was like, if I'm not the one handling this, it's not getting handled as well as it could.
mhm.
And because my girls are so helpless, I couldn't let go of grip a lot. And so my parents would help when they were available. They were even just super gracious. Hughes in residency, I'd had to quit my job because I was a full-time mom of medically fragile kids. So I was no
Mhm.
longer able to work outside of the home. And so we had tons of medical expenses. And my parents were the ones that said, we want to find you a couple nurses that you trust that can come in and step in and give you a break when you need. And they graciously and generously, helped us do that. And so, yes, we did have that. And we did have incredible several nurses throughout their lifetime that laid down their lives to
Mhm,
be a part of our lives. And
mhm,
so we did have some help for sure. But emotionally, if a lot of it
mhm.
was just, it was a weight that I just felt like I had to carry, and situations that you don't have time to think, you just have to be on autopilot and go. I mean, I can specifically remember one of my girls being on the changing table and having a seizure, and they both had colds at the time, which for us a lot of times meant going to children's just because they didn't handle colds well. So, one of them is on the changing table having a seizure, and then the other one coughs and starts vomiting on the floor. And I don't have the width in my arms to do both things at the same time. And so you just had to do it. I mean, you know what I mean? You just had to do it. There was no other option but to just do the next thing, you know?
Okay, so what span of time has passed? 3, where are we now?
So
How long was this where they seized and you, with the little help you had, that was just your day to day and your night? They would seize and
I mean, that
trips to
was
the doctor.
that was up until their last days. That was up until they well, I say that once Hugh got out of residency and he was working a general pediatric job, once that happened, he had more bandwidth as well. So he was able to be present more. Because again, like I want to make abundantly clear based on a lot of this conversation that's going to unfold later,
Mm-hmm.
that was all he could do. That
Yeah. Yeah.
he was as helpful. He was an incredibly helpful dad. I would not, if you lined up every other person on this earth and said you get to choose somebody to reparent your girls with, I would choose him every time. And so
Yeah.
he was an incredible teammate in as much as he could be during that time. He just didn't literally have the hours in the day during
Mm-hmm.
it. So again, the girls get to be about about 5 years old, and Bailey Grace starts to have more frequent seizures that aren't being controlled by medicine, starts to not tolerate food as well. They had gotten feeding tubes at about 3.5, 4, which again, in hindsight, was a sign that the disease was progressing.
Mm-hmm.
We just didn't know. And so she wasn't tolerating feeds as well. She was uncomfortable a lot of the time. Her happy demeanor had changed. She was losing presence. And so again, in hindsight, she was dying. I mean, that was what was happening,
Mm-hmm.
but we just didn't know. Meanwhile, we had always wanted to adopt. That was always something that Hugh and I both had wanted to do. And we started the domestic adoption process and matched with a couple birth mothers who actually ended up parenting. And longer story long, had somebody reach out to us and asked us if we knew anybody adopting older children from China, and show us a picture of this little boy who is at that point in a wheelchair. And I immediately say out loud to God, immediately, well, I don't have 3 arms, so it's not me. Like almost like this
Yeah.
isn't my story, like this isn't it. It's not me. Can't get him off my mind. And so show Hugh a picture of him. And then about an hour after I showed Hugh a picture of him, Hugh says, "What's the deal with that kid from China?" And immediately we both just knew this is our son. And so we found out he had cerebral palsy. He has a mild form of cerebral palsy that just affects his legs. Obviously, we didn't know all that at the time, but start the adoption process to China. And 8 months later, go to China to bring our son home from China.
He was
Not,
7.
he was 7 at the time. He was not in a wheelchair. They just had him in a wheelchair at the orphanage because it was easier with the amount of kids, but he could walk with like a cane, which we had brought, all kinds of things to see how he could do. He could walk well with a cane. And so bring him home again in the midst of, we didn't know at the time that Bailey Grace is dying, but Bailey Grace is dying. And so we bring this new child home
Did the girls
from
stay
China
home while y'all went to China, or did?
for 15 days. I didn't like
Oh,
leaving those girls for 2 hours.
oh wow.
And I had my parents, this is so silly almost now, knowing what I know, but I wrote them a letter. I was so afraid they were going to forget me while I was gone. And so I wrote them a letter basically saying, this is why we're going to do what we're doing. This isn't because we value you any less. We want James to have a home too. I love you. And I had my parents read it to him every day that I was gone, just to remind them,
Yeah.
like, I'm coming home. I'm coming home. And we had lots of help. We had friends come help, nurses come help, family come help. So it was like, it was a team effort. But we bring James home. And normally it's funny because, with older child adoption, that's tough in itself. But about a month into James being home, it becomes very clear that Bailey Grace is dying, that she's not just in the midst of heart disease, that she's dying.
Mm.
And with HECW2, there's not a lot we know, but the variant that the girls have, their brain gut connection is completely a mess. And so over time, that connection shuts off. And so food essentially became poison to them. So even
Oh my.
having a feeding tube, nutrients just were poison to them. They could not, they would just seize and seize and seize, be completely absent, vomit, sleep. They couldn't handle food. And so with Bailey Grace in June of 2019, I'd known about a month before, she's dying. I don't care what anyone says, she's dying. And she woke up in gut-wrenching pain after we had already, I mean, we really weren't feeding her that much at that point because she couldn't handle it. And took her into the hospital, and palliative came in, and it's like, we knew. And so
Mhm.
Hugh and I talked, and we both kind of prayed through the night and agreed, like, yeah, she's dying. I mean, this is what's happening, and we're not gonna force her. We always said quality of life over quantity. So we're
Mhm.
not gonna
Right.
force her to be here in a body that is failing her. And so we went home on hospice that day, and she died 2 weeks later. She died July 13th of 2019. Again, I'm Google translating to James still at this point. He doesn't know English, like, your sister died, and hoping that Google, like,
Wow.
this is how chaotic our environment is. So, I mean, the plot twist here is that we just know Allie's gonna die too, right? It's
Now, may
like,
I ask you a question about the
you can ask me any questions.
okay, you told James. How did Allie handle? Was she fully aware, and how did she grieve, or was she oblivious to really what was going on?
Yeah, she pulled away from Bailey Grace about the last 6 months of Bailey Grace's life. And looking back on that, I really do believe it was intentional. Bailey Grace, I always tell people this. Goodness. Okay. Bailey Grace needed to die first. She was, personality wise, the girls couldn't have been more different. Allie was extroverted, the center of attention, sassy. James and Allie were developed pretty decent relationship before Allie passed away. Bailey Grace was soft and steadfast and didn't have to be the center of attention, and was a really good teacher for us in order to how to best care for Allie in Allie's
Mm.
progression.
Did you conjecture based on what was happening, or did the doctors tell you the same thing was going to happen to Allie?
I think we
Or
just
you
knew,
really didn't know, did you?
we didn't know, we knew they were identical. And so I'll tell you, about a month after Bailey Grace died, I woke up to Allie. The girls had all different types of seizures. And this one type of seizure that Bailey Grace had in the last 6 months of her life was one Allie had never had.
Mhm.
And about a month after Bailey Grace died, I woke up to Allie having one of those seizures. And I texted Hugh, she's doing it. And he knew exactly what I meant. It's like, she's doing it. And so Allie didn't die until 17 months after Bailey Grace died, but that 17 months was slow motion, both nightmare and also one of the most beautiful things that I could have ever experienced, because how many people get to walk their child to death, period. First of all, a lot of that's out of order. Not everybody gets to do that. And then also, how many people get to pause everything else in their life, everything else, and center in on the one thing that matters and just live simply like that. I mean, we lived just for the moment. We appreciated the tiniest things. We celebrated half birthdays. We, went on walks and sat in a hammock and recognized it for the beauty that it is. We did so many things that were just priceless. I mean, priceless, that we all do every single day, but that we just don't know how fleeting and beautiful it is. And so we got to do that with Allie. And I'll tell you, parts of it were a nightmare, because one of the things we learned with Bailey Grace is that as the disease progressed, the less we fed, the better. So with Allie, as soon as she would be uncomfortable for a week or so at a time, or have more seizures or be less present, we would pull back on feeds. And so we got to November, and she was so tiny. I mean, she was so tiny, 7.5, and just wearing a 3T, I mean, just so tiny. And we got there, and we had a meeting with palliative. And at that point, she was getting 4 ounces of Pedialyte in her G tube a day. Like, that's it. Like, that's all she was getting. And Hugh and I had started to feel like it's time to let go again. It's time. And we met with palliative, and they started giving us, and we had an incredible palliative team. Our
At
hospice nurse is now,
children, at
oh my
children.
gosh, yes. And our hospice nurse is now one of my best friends. And so
Mm.
she was I mean, how many people can you say
Wow.
were there when both your kids died?
Yeah.
That, I mean, she was there. And so, anyways, I say that to say I looked at our palliative doctor and I said, she said, we can pull back another ounce this week. And I said, for who? And she
Mhm.
kind of humbly, I mean, really with tears in her eyes, which it's pretty remarkable for someone who has that job that they're not desensitized,
Yeah.
And she said, for you.
Mm.
And I couldn't even get the sentence out, and I just said, I'm not doing that. So I'm not doing it to her. I said, we're going to stop. And so we stopped feeding her. I mean, we stopped feeding her. And that was the choice that we made. And the one request I had from God in all of this was let it be a little faster than Bailey Grace's process. We could never get Bailey Grace's pain under control. 9 days is not an incredible amount of time, but it is when you're watching your kid die. That
Mhm.
was how long she had lasted in the end of life days. And Allie met a world record, literally, and lasted 19 days without fluids.
Oh.
19. She was probably 19, 20 pounds when she died. Her skin, I mean, just so sorry to trigger everyone's, but her skin was hanging off of her bones. I mean, I've never on any video that I've ever seen of a child in a third world country seen a human look like this. And it was my child, and I'd asked God for the exact opposite. So she finally died on December 16th of 2020. And I, there were years of trauma that I had disassociated from. I was a shell of a person caregiving for two kids for 8 years, and it was beautiful and it was incredible and it was rich, and I wouldn't have traded with anybody. But then I was still left with me at the end of all of this and having to figure out who was I.
Mm. So did it hit you? It was you, Hugh, and James. What hit you? It's like finding
Yeah,
yourself. I mean, or
yeah.
did you feel like part of your purpose in life had just ended?
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, I've been, writing and speaking, and everyone loved the girls, both people who knew them in person, our families, our friends were all based around the girls. My internet platform was based around the girls. And as much as that was based around my solace that I offered people, that God was good in suffering and that you could get through anything and that suffering was not bad, it was good, and that my faith was strong, and I think it made people feel better, right? Because it was like, oh good, like I can go through anything, and God is still going to give me a sense of his presence and his goodness and his love. And while I actually do believe that to be true still, which is a miracle in itself, it's a lot more complicated than that, unfortunately. And I had to begin the hard work of reinforming myself of who I am, and knowing that I couldn't unsee the things that I'd unseen, and having to really do the brave work of figuring out what that meant for me moving forward, and maybe even braver of believing that who I am moving forward still has great purpose in this world, even though it's going to look drastically different than those 8 years of my life. And even though that's going to be disappointing, even to a lot of people, because a lot of people were very comfortable with that version of me. And while it was authentic then,
Mhm.
grief changes you, and those experiences are meant to grow you and evolve you as a human being. And I would be doing a disservice to those who have walked through hard things if I didn't now choose to use this platform in
Mm.
a way that informed the world of that.
Tell us about your platform now.
So holistic health has always been a huge part of who I am. Again, I have a master's in social work. I've always been interested in mental health and physical health and the way the two kind of coincide.
Mhm.
And right after Allie died, I knew that the trauma in me, just based on my own education, needed to have a place to go. I was 105 pounds soaking wet, and not fueling my body well, not
Mhm.
caring for myself well, looks like a different person from not sleeping, eating,
Mhm.
etc. And so I knew enough to know that a part of that journey was going to have to be me moving through that.
Mhm.
And so ended up getting my personal training certification as kind of a way of saying like, hey, new season, let's kind of see where this goes. Started doing group fitness coaching at Orange Theory and found a lot of just it's really a sweet season for me, honestly, in a time where I didn't know what the heck I was doing.
Mhm.
Was able to be in a very lighthearted, safe, fun environment with people who didn't know me during the
Mhm.
girls' lives. And in some ways, I liked that because I could just be me and figure
Mhm.
out who that person was. So did that. And in the midst of that, my head coach there, who's a really good friend of mine, who'd become like a brother to me, we just started talking and both were really passionate about individualized programming for people and sort of tying in this idea of mental and physical health and and helping people in a more personal individual way. And so we decided to go into business together and that started in July, and it's WinMo Fitness,
July,
and basic this
July.
year, so
Oh,
of
okay. So y'all
2022,
just kicked off.
just started. We've just
Oh,
kicked off.
okay.
Yeah, this is a
And
new
what's your
business.
business partner's name?
Win. His
Okay.
name's Win
Oh,
Warren. Yeah.
okay. Winmo. Okay.
Um, yes, WinMo. There you go. So Win has been in fitness for a very, very long time, and he does the majority of our programming. It's online, and so it is not just Birmingham based. It is
Mhm.
anybody and everybody can do it. We have an app where you get your individualized programming with whatever that looks like for you. And so I'm really passionate about people with busy schedules, people who need just body weight exercises, people who travel, people who have home gym, or people who want to go to a gym and, you know, you work out there, exercise there, people who do like trendy fitness, but want a little extra, whatever. That's a lot of our clients. And then we also have nutrition coaching as well that's included with that. I'm
And do
really
you do
passionate.
that? Do you do the
Yes,
nutrition
that's
part?
me. Yes,
So if
I do the
someone is
nutrition part.
on your app or if they have the membership, they get
Right.
both nutrition and a personalized fitness. It's different for
They
everyone.
do. It's different
Wow.
for everyone.
That's great.
And this is the piece to me that I think truly sets us apart. We are really available 24/7 to our clients. And so let's say you're at the gym and you have a movement where we either we tag videos of different movements so that people can see the
Mhm.
correct way to do it. Well, let's say you're confused about it or you need to send a video to Win to make sure you're doing it right. You can shoot it to him right then and he'll get right back to you. Same with me. If you are having a hard time, because here's the deal with fitness and health. We all have a relationship with movement and nutrition. We all do. We can't get past it.
Mhm.
It's either a good one or a bad one.
Mhm.
And accountability and someone helping you dig deeper into the whys behind your behaviors with those two things is one of the only ways a lot of people are going to be able to change their relationship with food and movement for the better. And so we're just really passionate about walking alongside people in that journey in order to get to the place they want to be, whether that's physical goals or mental health goals, which again, for me, during that season, I dove into fitness in a way that I started researching why is this so helpful? Like I understand
Mhm.
endorphins, feel good hormones being released.
Mhm.
I get that. But fitness for me became literally therapy.
Mm.
And as I've researched it and read books like The Body Keeps Score and
Oh, yeah.
really, honed in on podcasts, it's so obvious to me that both big traumas, the big things that we go through, and then also little traumas are so affected and so healed by the ways we learn to move through those things by actually physically moving our bodies. And so we're passionate about it. We just started doing some trauma movement conferences
I
where
was gonna
we
ask you
went
about that. So y'all are available to go anywhere to do these.
anywhere. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
and you can
We,
also, sure, do them online if there's someone who wants that as part of their
for
package.
sure.
Okay, wow.
For
And
sure.
and
Yeah.
and of course, you're qualified beyond your degree in social work. I mean, you've got probably more qualification than anyone I've I've ever met to help someone through trauma. But do you find that with the clients that you're working with that do have, because not everyone necessarily has trauma, are you finding that something clicks when they
Yes.
realize
I
how it's part of a, not a trilogy, but it's part of their movement, of the way they think about food? I mean, because I see what you're saying. You have to understand that before anything's going to work in those other two realms.
right. I mean, I think of all the people that I know who make movement and nutrition about aesthetics, which again,
Yeah.
listen, I can be as vain as the next one.
Hmm.
I'm proud of the body that I've built through the discipline that I've had. So
Hmm.
I'm not at all trying to say that that's a bad goal. I just think it's cheating yourself of
Hmm.
so much more. There's so much more to these things than just looking better or building a summer
Hmm.
body. And I particularly think just in the environments I've grown up in, there's this myth of do more cardio and be skinny and don't eat too much. And all three
Yeah.
of those things are so far
Oh yeah.
from what it takes to have a healthy body and a healthy mindset towards that. And so something that I have found that has been super rewarding for me is when you start to watch somebody in the transition of that mentality to I want to fuel my body well so that a I can be the best version of who I am throughout my day, serve the people around me the best that I can. B, tell myself that I'm worth that. I'm worth
Mhm.
caring for. And then C, finding that anxiety, depression, some of those things that have just enslaved you, that it's not that they've gone away, but that you have more tools in your tool belt to know how to work through some of those things. And a lot of that too, and this is what we talk about a lot in our trauma conferences, a lot of that is just being present in your body while you're doing what you're doing. We're also we're doing five things at once, even
Mhm.
working out. I mean, listen to music sometimes, but like, what does it look like for you to push yourself on the treadmill without the noise? What does it look like for you to trust yourself to be able to lift that weight one more time, just you alone? I mean, that's the powerful stuff.
That's a, I okay. We need a whole nother podcast on just on this, because I just looked up and because I have another one and I'm sure you've got something, and I'm like, I have a jillion questions about this that I'm not going to
Right.
get to today, but this is fascinating. I've never, I mean, yeah, I mean, I have a workout program, but it doesn't integrate all of this, and this is fascinating to me. And I mean, I feel like it's really cutting edge and life changing for a very specific segment. So I want to circle back and learn a whole lot more about that. But before we finish, can you give us a snippet description of your three books, which I'm going to link? And can you just tell us, for people who might want to read, buy one or all, give us a nutshell what they are?
Yeah. Okay. On Milk and Honey, How God's Goodness Shows Up in Unexpected Places. That's my first book. That book is really about the journey to finding out that something was going on with the girls. It is a lot of detail about those first few years, and it is a lot of it's very rich. You look back on your life and you look at it's very rich. I think it would be very impactful for someone who really needs some sound truth to sit on in the midst of a really hard thing. And so that's what I'll say about that. That's kind of On Milk and Honey. Are We There Yet is my second book. And that one is sort of the same concept of the journey towards adoption, the journey in the girls' years where things were up and down, and just sort of learning to try to live in the present moment in the midst of a harder story. That's Are We There Yet? The most recent book that I published, which is through Paper Peony Press. They are the most amazing publishing company. So I always have to give them a shout out. They are the real deal. They are not about just making money and marketing. They let me write what is true to me. They're amazing. So that book is called Even in Darkness, and it is a modern day Psalms for anybody. I'd like to say, yes, it uses very Christianese language, but I like to think that regardless of your faith background, that it could be a comforting thing to sort of wrestle with as you have walked through something hard and you're trying to sort of figure out, like, why me? What's going on? Why is this hard thing happen in my life? That one is definitely more of a, I don't love the word devotional, but devotional style book.
Okay, I want to ask you one thing based upon I'm listening to these books, your story. If someone, and I have one very specific person in mind, and I know people watching and listening, it may be themselves or it may be someone they love that's walking through trauma.
Yeah.
Can someone connect with you through WinMo and start there? And they may say, okay, I'm not right now. I just need help with this trauma. And then you ease them into, like, can the first part of it be helping them get a grip to the point where they're like, okay, I'm ready to now focus on these two things. Because some people may not be.
1,000.
Okay.
So I'll tell you, the way that we do things, the way that we organically, honestly, have just done things is because it's individualized, we ask people to start slow and steady. So we talk through 1 to 3 goals, 1 to 3 goals, and we sit with those goals. And then I sit with you on a Zoom call, and we may not even touch that goal. And then at the end, I'll say, hey, were you able to get your water in? And in some mysterious way that I don't understand, well, that scientifically makes sense, as you are working through some of these other things in your life, suddenly you're able to find the motivation to get your water goals in this week. And you're not sure why, but you did. And then after 2 or 3 weeks of that, I'll say, all right, let's try to get some more protein in. And we take these small little steps, and sometimes we take 2 steps backwards and 1 step forward. It's a process. But to us, there are sexier ways to do it. There's pills to take and diets that'll promise you 5 to 10 pounds where you won't be sustainably living your life, but you'll maybe be losing weight. But to really help people, which is our goal, always here to help, that's kind of our motto, you can't stay there. You have to integrate it all. You have to.
Wow. Well, you have something that I'm so thrilled and honored to get to share and to get to expose people watching and listening to, because I know there are people out there that this is the perfect fit for them. Maybe not now, maybe later, but wow. And I want you to come back and just talk more about that. But thank you, Morgan. Wow, you're amazing. You're amazing. You've got so much to share. And I'm personally going to buy all of your books. As soon as we get off, are they on? I'm going to get your links.
They're on Amazon.
Okay. So, and are they Kindle and Audible?
Yes, for sure. For Even in Darkness, I am so unprofessional when it comes to a lot of things in life, if I'm honest. The first 2, at one point there was, I think there still is, but I won't promise that for the ones that I self-published. Even in Darkness, yes.
Okay. Well, this is wonderful. Morgan, thank you. And I'm so grateful. I'm honored that you shared and you were so vulnerable, and you have an open invitation to come back anytime.
You're so sweet. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it so, so much.
Thank you. And we're going to get together again, and you have a great day, my friend.
Same to you. Same to you.